This is episode 38. My name is Mandy, and today we are speaking with Teika Newton, Membership and Domestic Policy Manager for Climate Action Network Canada. In this role, Teika combines analytical and strategic thinking about climate policy development with her love for meeting people, learning their stories, and building relationships in support of lasting, meaningful climate action. Teika lives in Kenora, Ontario, in the heart of Treaty 3 territory on Lake of the Woods. Prior to focusing on climate advocacy, she spent a decade working on community development projects to enhance social, environmental, and economic sustainability in the Treaty 3 region, drawing on the cultural knowledge and expertise inherent to the settler and Indigenous peoples of the territory. In her spare time, if her hands aren't in the soil or scratching a pet's head, she and her husband and their 2 kids are usually adventuring by ski, paddle, cycle, or foot in the wilderness around their off-grid home. Welcome, Teika. We have 5 questions for you. What climate problem keeps you up at night?
So for me, the question isn't really so much about what keeps me up at night as like, what is my own particular form of existential angst about climate change that gnaws at me and compels me to do the things that I do. Action, I find, is a really powerful antidote to guilt and fear. And the reason that I'm working in this field now is because the more that I learned about climate change and its impacts, the less I could justify doing anything else. In what feels like really a past life, many years ago, I used to be a genomic scientist, and before that, I was an evolutionary biologist. And although both were totally worthwhile, really fascinating fields of study, climate change is where I ended up having to land. More recently, I've been a mother, a family member, an active contributor to the web of relationships that support the social and environmental justice causes here in my town. But today, my focus is on trying to build connections that help people to understand what their contributions are in sustaining the diversity of life on this planet. Diversity, I think, is the foundation of resilience, and I think it's what will ensure our survival. So I do the work that I do during the day so that I actually get to sleep at night. I'm really conscious of the need to safeguard nights as restful time for restoration. And I really want to drive that home because action and advocacy just cannot be sustained if proper care isn't taken to avoid exhaustion. And burnout and depression are really prevalent in the climate movement. They're dangers that are just never far off. Sometimes it's really hard to set aside and compartmentalize the crushing angst, and many of us walk a delicate balance in terms of where we direct our caring energies. Like so many of my friends and peers, I've had to learn through experience that care and compassion needs to be focused equally inward as outward to be able to maintain good health and a good balance. Still, at night when it's dark in the house, I often lay in bed and I think about the well-being of others, and especially the 2 little people I brought into the world. When my kids were really small, I think that like every parent, I'd lay in bed fitfully and I'd be alert for crying from the other room. And although I was really sleep deprived, I think I was very lucky that I was able to do something to fix almost all of their relatively small, simple little person problems when they were little kids. And I think once that's learned, that maternal alertness to danger and insecurity probably never goes away. Being cautious and on guard and ready to act is now part of who I am. Now my kids are a lot older and they're becoming more independent, but the concerns that I have for their well-being haven't dissipated. They've just changed. I look at my kids as less as malleable little people that I'm responsible for shaping and molding. And more I look at them as players in a complex system. They're contributors to this huge life system here on Earth. And in the quiet moments, I think about the structures and systems that either sustain or destroy that life system. And I think about the fate of my kids and their peers. My ability to fix the complicated big person problems sometimes seems so small and inadequate. There's a lot of hardship out there. There are systemic failures, and more I see that none of us is guaranteed safe passage through a long life. People are dying all around the world already from climate change impacts. Many more are fleeing. They're seeking refuge in safer places that more often than not aren't welcoming them in with hospitality and warmth and compassion. And so this makes me feel really, really incredibly sad. When I give myself the space to think and feel, I often cry, and sometimes it's totally spontaneously and with absolutely overwhelming grief. The scale and scope of the impacts of climate change are just so enormous. The timescales are incomprehensible, and it all feels overwhelming at times, and I can feel really small. I think about generations who've lived through other periods of catastrophe in the past. They've lived through great wars, plagues, famines. Those would be moments that also must have felt apocalyptic, just like today. And those people probably felt that their world, as they knew it was ending, there must have been so much terror and grief. And yet I have to remind myself that life has persisted and consistently found a way through. New creations and human ingenuity have contributed to making the world so much better than we ever could have possibly imagined at so many points in history. So I'm keenly aware that as climate change continues to ravage landscapes and annihilate species and undermine food webs, and that my kids are similarly likely to live through levels of grief and hardship that I've been so fortunate never to have known firsthand. On the other hand, I still have hope that our collective grief can be balanced with at least an equal, if not greater, power of creativity and hopefulness to guide us through this fog.
What is the solution?
So I just laid out a really big, really complex problem, and it would be silly of me to say that there's a single solution to it. I'm a really emotional and empathic person, empathetic person. I'm also really analytical, and it's no surprise that the first chapter of my career path was focused on science. I spend a lot of time thinking about how to achieve solutions and trying to unpack this really complex problem. And it's actually the thing I think about the most in the whole world. I think solutions require a personal commitment to embrace the possibilities that exist in an infinite universe. Each of us, through our own particular set of morals and beliefs and attitudes, has a choice to set the conditions that allow for solutions to be accepted and tested and applied. We have a choice to open up to be open to generative creative forces. And in my experience, generosity and creativity are intimately bound to love and compassion. So these are really powerful forces that we need to tap into. At the level of like whole systems, the planet, or if you want to go really big, the universe, complexity creates opportunities for unexpected outcomes. And sometimes these outcomes emerge as really surprising solutions. The more complex the web of cause and effect relationships, the less we can guess with any accuracy what outcomes might emerge from any given series of causes and effects. Rather than any single fate being set in stone, outcomes tend to be probabilistic in complex systems. And for me, this is a huge source of really justifiable hope. Within the realm of probability, there's possibility. And possibility means chances at unexpected solutions and like seemingly miraculous outcomes. So being able to generate a wide array of possible outcomes, some of which might be solutions, really depends on the system having complexity. And that complexity can also be described as diversity. The more diverse the genetic composition of a population, for example, the greater the likelihood that the diversity within that population will contain a variant that's better able to cope with a new pathogen or a new environmental stress. And similarly, the more diverse our society is, the more likely we are to find the right combination of actions and behaviors that help us to weather changes and find solutions together. So I think of diversity as the cornerstone of our collective survival. And this, plus like personal moral accountability that each of us has to others who are sharing the planet with us, is the foundation of the climate justice work that I and all my colleagues bring to our work at Climate Action Network Canada. We need the diversity of all people's perspectives and experiences to inform the ways that we think about and respond to the climate crisis. We need the generative powers of love and compassion for our fellow beings to drive this creative thinking, to see and feel our ways toward recognizing solutions when they arise.
What's in the way?
So over the weekend, I was thinking a lot about this question, what's in the way? What is it that blocks people from jumping in with both feet to solve the climate crisis? And I've concluded, I think not surprisingly, that it's a combination of fear and the comforts that some people find in what I guess is like dominant cultural inertia or privilege. So fear is what causes the unknown to be seen as a landscape of only negative possibility, and to see disruptions only as disaster and not possibility. privilege is what enables a lot of us, so many of us, who get at least some benefit from things being as they are, to carry on with business as usual, even if they know that it's harmful or hurtful to others. It can be really hard to overcome the inertia that's required to change how things are done, especially when it's being done a certain way for a really long time, or it gives special benefit to certain people. It requires extra effort, extra energy, and it requires courage. Sometimes setting aside privilege in order to make amends in an unjust system requires that a person stands out. Sometimes they have to stand up and be noticed. They have to become a target for others' attentions. And that can be both good and bad. It can feel scary and isolating and really vulnerable. It's easy to feel vulnerable simply by being exposed to new ideas and new experiences in places that are unfamiliar, or ignorance might make us look foolish or feel uncomfortable or embarrassed, and that's also not a nice feeling. So overcoming inertia and making change for the sake of justice and equity likely requires each of us to make peace with how we share power, and really being okay with releasing fears that sometimes cause us to put a stranglehold over the things that we associate with security and comfort. But I think it's the work that we really need to do to avoid the trap of continuing to do the same harmful things over and over and over again. We need to remember that in the unknown, possibilities of miraculousness exist, and that disruptions can also cause flourishing, cracking open new spaces for new opportunities for those who haven't benefited in the past. So yeah, I think that that's our path forward.
How can people help?
How can people help? Well, I used to think it was just a matter of education. And, you know, if everybody knew all the facts, of course, they're going to make the right decisions. But years of experience have showed me that cultural biases and that drive to fit in and be accepted within established norms is just so strong. And the comforts of privilege, which I just spoke about, can provide a lot of cover to justify bad behaviors and moral behaviors. So rational fact-based arguments might compel some personal changes in some people, but it's not a really great way of affecting wide-scale, rapid social change. So the climate movement's big challenge is really all about shifting cultural norms. We need to work together to dispel cultural fears around the unknown, to demystify it, and to help illuminate it as a space where wonder and possibility exists. At the same time, our work has to engender a calling in and uplifting of diversity. We need to celebrate the solutions that come from the novel interactions among diverse people in new and unique ways. So much of this work actually starts at the personal level. I know we talk a lot about the systemic nature of the problems that we're facing, but change really does happen at the personal level. It's not just about modeling behaviors that we want to see in the world. It's about each of us actually becoming the students and scholars of these behaviors in the ways that cements them into our hearts, our minds, our souls. We need to have deep and intuitive knowledge around what possibility is, what it means to have hope, the kind of hope that quells fears in ourselves and offers others reassurances that can help to illuminate positive and generative creative paths. I think we need to steadfastly embody that commitment to collaboration across diversity, not just because it's the morally correct thing to do or because we desire to be anti-racist, but because diversity is the beating heart of the life force that sustains all of us. It's where resilience comes from. And it's what's going to keep our society and our systems and this planet capable of regeneration, of healing, and problem solving together. The work happens when we put our own personal commitments forward to face fear with hope and to hold fast to a vision for a good future, to infuse generative, creative, life-giving energies to our work, and most of all, to remember and live and breathe our interconnections with everything and everything around us. I think it is so important to talk to your friends and to talk to your neighbors, and to my children's horror, to talk to strangers. I think it's even really important to convey through any means of communication you have available to you, whether that's words or thoughts or prayers or songs, a relationship. You need to communicate a relationship with rocks and trees and animals and plants and like all the things that make up this planet. We need to be connected, and we need those connections to be strong and plentiful. So build and reinforce creativity, strengthen the life support systems by building up diversity, and use your imagination, creativity, your thoughts, your words to breathe hope into life and possibility.
What is the good future?
This was the question that I found the hardest to really think about, because although I'm filled with hope and like all these imaginings about possibilities, I don't know what the good future looks like. It's really not set in stone. I can describe some of the qualities it has. It's one in which life, creativity, and love flourish, but I can't tell you specifically what it looks like. I hope that the future is one that sees all species being treated with reverence and wonder and honor. I hope it's a place where equity is a guiding principle, where having enough is enough, and that people's lives are infused with a sense of purpose and interconnection, and rather than isolation, confusion, despair. I see and feel the adversity that we're in right now. We are living through a very difficult time, but in spite of all of it, I really truly do believe that the best is still ahead of us. So I'm really hopeful for whatever the good future is, and I hope that we all co-create it together. I'm excited about what comes next.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Teika. Before we sign off, we have asked our guests to share one last interesting Enviro fact to ponder, and here's what Teika wanted you to know. Transformation of electricity systems is founded on the principles of diversity and complexity. The shift from large single fuel generation facilities to distributed generation from a variety of fuels, plus efficiency, plus storage and smart grid is a great example of diversifying systems. This not only shifts us away from polluting electricity systems, but increases the resilience and reliability of the grid and affordability of electricity in the long term. Thank you again for joining us, Teika. This was EnviroCentre's Green Room.